So the November SAT is coming up in less than 3 weeks, but 3 weeks is actually a lot of time if you can use it effectively. So the main idea in improving in the SAT is figuring out what your actual constraint is. So if you can improve like that specific constraint, what you're going to do is you're going to improve your score immensely. But if you're not focusing on your current constraint, that can actually effectively lower your score by practicing on something that you don't actually need work on. So hi, I'm Karthik. This is what it takes to get a high score. All right, let's get right into it. Constraints, right? The main constraints for every section. For reading, right? Constraints aren't really the issue, right? For reading, the strategy itself is based on figuring out the series of questions and building strategies for them. I have a completely separate video on the reading section. I've posted it maybe 4 or 5 videos ago. It effectively talks about how to build strategies for every particular question and how there isn't really a constraint in reading. There's just the lack of practice because you're not really in a learning stage, you're in a practice stage for it's essentially all of reading. So there's no need to focus on that aspect for reading. And if you want to know how to improve on that specifically, that's going to in a different video. But for grammar and math specifically, this is where doing the wrong things can actually limit your potential so much. So for grammar and math, the main idea would be practicing and mastery, right? I don't really cover the concept of careless mistakes, but I'll do it very quickly right now. The concept of careless mistakes has nothing to do with your practice or your mastery, and it tends to only happen in the higher levels of mastery, right? Maybe due to overconfidence or whatever the reason is, just mainly it has to do with careful reading and practicing even more to make sure they don't happen. So when you catch it happening, building a strategy to make sure they don't happen. It's almost the final or like the last portion of mastery in which they show up, in which you can tackle them very quickly, but you need to treat them seriously like they are a mistake, and how you can prevent yourself from making it next time so that you can actually consider it, right? Because you're still going to continue to make that mistake if you don't do something to explicitly stop it. And that's essentially the theme of this video for practicing and mastery, right? So for this learning phase of testing, do you know every single skill, and do you encounter issues where you particularly don't know what to do next, right? So let's say you read a grammar question or a math question and the concept is just so foreign to you where you don't understand what to do next. That's where you're going to typically apply this portion, right? So the idea is that you need to tackle that specific portion before you move on to the next step, right? So if I'm just practicing Khan Academy problems on like quadratics, let's say, but I don't know like what the roots of quadratics or how to like factor them in the best way possible, that's going to limit your learning, right? You're not going to be able to progress as well as if you did know that information and then you started practicing, right? So for learning specifically, do you encounter issues during your tests, maybe for grammar that you read a sentence and you don't actually understand what is wrong with it? Right? You read it and you see all the answer choices and you don't understand why they're changing the specific word. Let's say they're changing the tense of it and you don't understand why one is more correct than the other, right? That would be an issue of learning. You don't actually know the differentiation between them and why they're used. Or maybe it's like some punctuation mark that you haven't seen, like dashes or semicolons, and you don't know if it's correct or wrong, right? You have no way of knowing. Practicing more problems isn't going to teach you that method. It's figuring out, do you know the difference, right? Now for practicing, right? Do you encounter problems where instead of like, fully know the skill, but you're having a hard time figuring out how that rule actually applies to this specific problem? So first of all, you don't even encounter the learning stage problems. You never encounter a problem where you just don't know what to do, right? You know what to do, you know all the rules, you know the skills to apply, but the issue is how do you interpret it within that problem, right? How does that rule actually apply to the question that you have right in front of you? If you have that gap in your understanding, it's about practicing, right? The question difficulty is a bit too high, and extrapolating like the specific skill that you've learned and applying that to the question is very difficult, right? So you need to focus on practicing easier problems and then progressively increasing them, and I'll explain how to do it, right? So first of all, for your learning constraints, how exactly do you get over them? So first of all, the first step is actually going to just be identifying what those are. And on the previous slide, I talked about exactly how you identify how you focus on these, or how you identify those skills, right? I focused on like, how do you identify the learning constraints? It's based on if you're encountering that problem, right? But here's one more thing that I think is less obvious, right? So obviously, if you don't know the problem, you're in the learning stage, right? But go on Khan Academy, right? And for grammar and math, look through the skill titles. Now, based on the skill title, can you actually tell every aspect of the question that is going to show up, right? So let's say the title just says like commas, independent and dependent clauses. Could you imagine a hypothetical question that involves those and what would make a comma use correct or incorrect? Can you come up with some examples off the top of your head? What would it ask you, right? If there's any remote doubt that you like don't know what it could potentially ask you or what that type of question looks like, you have a gap here. Even though you might explicitly know the function and the purpose of like commas, let's say if you can't come up with that type of question, I still think you have a gap, and I still think you'll get some value from actually using this, right? From doing this portion, because practicing, even though you might still get a ton of value from that because you generally understand the skill, if you're unable to just come up with a question based on that skill, you're limiting yourself for learning because you're just going to be practicing something that doesn't have direct involvement with what your problem is right now, which is identifying the exact use of that rule, right? Whether it's a grammar rule or whether it's a math concept, right? So the first thing you want to do is watch those Khan Academy videos. They're so useful. They're free. They have easier and difficult examples like broken up into two, so you can first learn the easy one and then work on the hard one and figure out what they actually did to get that problem right. So reference outside resources, right? The Khan Academy videos are not enough. They're just an introduction to that topic. Basically, the best ones that are going to be are like ones that have high views on YouTube, right? And the reason why I say that is because those videos on YouTube from reputable people who are talking about those concepts, and if they have high views and high like counts, they're most likely to be useful in the sense that the video is actually going to help you learn it, but also the video is probably going to be accurate as well if so many people are giving thumbs up to it and actually like learning from it as well. Watch both examples from the Khan Academy video to get a general idea, and then, supplement this to figure out exactly what the rule is about, right? So it's going to be pretty good to do that portion. But the idea of this entire portion is that you're able to memorize it at the end, right? So repeat the first step. The first step was, can you identify the portions of questions that are come up from the skill of the title? And now you should be able to come up with multiple examples, right? So based on that skill, like what are some questions that might come up? You can literally reference the ones that you just talked about, but hopefully try to come up with some slightly different examples, like what it would actually be testing. And instead of coming up with just a direct question, can you just answer this question to yourself? What is this question effectively testing, right? And from there, memorize that, right? So if you can't do that, you obviously need to reference more videos and learn. But if you are able to, you need to memorize that specific portion. So from the videos itself, I like taking paper notes specifically because not only does it keep you engaged during the video, but you actually remember some after if you're forced to physically write it, and rewrite the main points and takeaways, right? So all the main points that you could actually like apply, right? So if someone, let's say, didn't know what commas are, what are like the 5 or 6 things that are the effective uses of commas, and like what function do they serve? What are those 5 or 6 purposes? Just list them down. And that basically becomes a thing that you have to memorize. By writing it down and actually applying it in the next stage, which is the practice stage, that's how you're going to be able to do it. Okay. Practicing constraints. It's less a series of actions in this one. That one was more of like, you need to do this first, then that, and then the final portion, but more of a list of things to generally do. If your gap is not learning based, right? So you've realized that you passed the 2 tests for learning, and maybe you've even watched the videos and realized that you already know all this information, you don't need to review it. If you don't have that gap, it's in here, right? Unless it's the careless mistake gap, which we talked very early on. But practicing the same type of question and slowly increasing the difficulty, right? And you can do this yourself by finding them in practice exams, in old QASs, on the college suite question bank. But Khan Academy does this automatically for you. It's the first time you ever take it, it assesses your skill level and then puts you in a category. And then once you take it again, it slowly increases the difficulty of questions, and they're extremely accurate to the exam, and it does it for you automatically. So why would you not use that free resource of slowly increasing the difficulty without any effort added, right? So practice those types of questions in Khan Academy where it increases the difficulty. And even after you've reached 4 out of 4, right? Which is like you've reached in the semicircle of skills, like you've reached the 4 out of 4 where you're in mastery, take it one more time because the questions actually have a 5th level, right? After you've achieved mastery, there's another level of questions that are even more difficult. And that's what you want to be acing in order to get it perfect on the exam, right? On the second idea, and this is less of an idea of something to do, but something you should be implementing every time you get a question wrong, is figuring out the why. Why did you miss the info or the question? You should build strategies to fix that specifically. So let's say I get a question wrong. The first thing I want to do is identify why is the correct answer correct, right? What specific portion made that answer correct? And then I want to figure out like why did I miss that piece of information early on? What and it's best if you just do this right after, and that's what Khan Academy is good for because it tells you the right answer as soon as you hit enter, right? So figure out why you missed that specific piece of information, and then you build a strategy to make sure that doesn't happen next time. So let's say I just glossed over it. Okay, next time I'm going to put my finger to the paper and read every single word and make sure that I go over it in specific order so I don't miss that portion next time, right? And there is always a reason. Don't just say something that like, oh, I just missed it and I'll get it next time. It was like a careless mistake. Like that is your issue. You need to build a specific strategy to fix that, or it's never going to get fixed. You're just going to keep repeating the problem, and then use your strategy. Practice again, use the strategy and make sure it works, and just stick with it if it works. You should have an organized method to solving every single problem once you've mastered this, right? So every time you encounter a problem now, it's become so easy to figure out what the solution is because you have this organized method, which is your strategy and your knowledge based on the learning base. Okay, overall, right, your total volume is probably the biggest driver of your success. To figure out all of your problems with like a type of question, you need a significant amount of testing. You need to be testing like, take at least like 4 or 5 exams to actually fully diagnose like every single issue that you potentially have. So like if anything is in the learning phase or anything in the practice phase, like you probably need about 5 exams to figure that out for every skill type, right? Because not every skill is tested on every single SAT. And for the practice stage, volume is literally how you improve. So not only do you need volume to diagnose your problem, you need volume to improve your practice stage problem. And understand that it's learning stage, you finish it, and then you go to practice, and then you finish it, right? So learning stage gets you to this baseline score where you can get all the easy problems correct, but some of the harder and medium ones, like you'll probably still get some of the medium difficulty ones correct, but the harder ones might be like a very low accuracy number. And it's the practice stage that gets that up high. So you're going to meet like a baseline completing the learning stage where you're not going to get the perfect score. So if you're aiming for that, you should be able to master the practice stage, right? So you effectively need volume even if you're in the learning stage. So I give out SAT prep and in my paid community, and basically in that paid community, you get 30 QAS exams, you get one-on-one sessions with me almost anytime, multiple days, in a week, almost every single day if you're able to attend every single one. And if you can't, there's recordings. And the main purpose of that is that you can get help from me. You're motivated to work every single day because you see me almost every single day, and you're able to ask questions on the board whenever I can answer. But you also get constant feedback from other people in the community, as well as accountability and college advice from me or other students who are in college, right? So the link is in the description to apply right now. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you learned something today.